Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are WSO2, and guess what? We're back with our summits after almost a year. So today, we are kicking off our APAC edition of the 2021 summits with the theme Platform for Innovation. I'm Pulasti Samaravira, Head of PFSI Channel Strategy and Channel Development for Identity and Access Management at WSO2. We've got an interesting set of talks today with some great speakers, and we'll be covering business and technical topics today. And before we do that, just a couple of housekeeping rules. You're in the main stage right now. So if you go back to the reception area, you can see the detailed agenda. And there is a menu to your left-hand side. If you browse through that, you can get into any of the stages and separate sessions as well. And if you want to ask any questions, there is a Q&A tab at the bottom. So please feel free to post your questions there, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. And also, if you want to go online on social media, you'll be really helping us out as well to spread the word. And when you do that, please use the hashtag WSO2 Summit, as always. And also, finally, there are WSO2 reps hanging around in the reception area, in the main stage, and also in the meeting rooms. Feel free to connect with them and, at your convenience, connect with them and, enjoy. All right, so to kick things off, let me bring on stage our VP and General Manager for the ANZ region, Taz Melisinos. Taz, over to you.
Thank you, Pula. All right. Welcome to everyone. Let me get all the buttons right and share the right presentation. All right. Hopefully everyone can see our screen and hear me clearly. But again, thanks a lot, Pula. Again, on behalf of the APAC WSO2 team, welcome to our 2021 summit. Before I do introduce our first keynote speaker, let me give you a little bit of a recap of where we have been and a little bit of insight as to where we're heading here at WSO2. Well, since our last summit in 2020, we have had our 16th anniversary, would you believe, 16 years already. We are now approaching over 1,000 employees globally, and we've opened up some new offices around the world in the last 12 months. So it's pretty exciting for our growth. We have built now a customer base now in excess of 1,000 and growing fast, and really released some new upgrades to our current portfolio, as well as some new products this year as well. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. To our current portfolio, which I know our existing customers know very well, and to our brand new prospects out there that are thinking about joining our family, let me tell you a little bit about our core products. API Manager and Identity Server platforms have had brand new releases in the last 12 months. API Manager 4.0 was released about 5-6 months ago, and Identity Server about 8 or 9 months ago. So we've got the latest technology for you available to upgrade to. We've also implemented in the last 12 months our purpose-built open banking platform in Australia, particularly over the last year or so, to meet various government compliance and regulation requirements, which has been quite exciting for us here in Australia. And soon, in the coming year or so, open banking will be a requirement for New Zealand. So we're hoping to expand that portfolio in that region very soon. Some exciting news from our camp is we've released a brand new iPaaS cloud native platform for you that's in public beta right now called Choreo. It's a new platform for innovation, speed, and productivity, and I encourage you to get access to the public beta and soon to be released GA version later in the year and have a look at the product. It's really, really exciting. Even more exciting news, and I'll give you a little bit of a teaser as well. We've got a brand new cloud IAM solution heading your way in the market later in the year, possibly early next year, called Asgardio. You don't see it on this chart, so it's a sneak peek into what's coming for the cloud IAM solution called Asgardio, brand new name. It's basically a developer-first IAM solution that drives seamless experience in security. So check that out in the coming months. It's exciting stuff from Team WSO2. Over the last 6 months or so, I've been reading a lot of analyst reports. Obviously, we've all been involved in a global pandemic, and the way we work has changed. And what I read recently, Vice President at Gartner, Brian Burke, released a really compelling document that I thought I might share with you this morning or this afternoon. He talked about his 10 top strategic trends in 2021 that he believes CIOs need to pay attention to, and he grouped them in, I suppose, these 3 categories. The first one is people centricity, which obviously highlights the way technology impacts people and stakeholders across the ecosystem, focusing on how people's behaviors, experience, and privacy will change and adapt to the new conditions. And I think we've all experienced that change in the way we work. The second part that also is obvious is location independence. Recognizes really that employees, suppliers, and customers can be anywhere, and that the pandemic has really accelerated the use of remote channels, particularly, distributed cloud, and use of the anywhere type operations, leveraging new security paradigms in adaptive authentication and identity and access control to drive this theme. And finally, it's in resilient delivery, because you can't have the first 2 without being able to execute and deliver. And I think this really recognizes and creates a technology organization that can rapidly adapt and overcome to these new challenges that we're facing and support the new operation model going forward. This includes really creating new composable business architecture that's supported by new technologies and the latest technologies like AI and automation to be innovative and create that new compelling advantage for our customers. Burke went on to say further that with a huge change driven by the pandemic and its related economic impacts, because all countries have had some pain and suffering around the pandemic, and has really affected their economies. A lot of hospitality industries and tourist industries have shut down during this pandemic, so they've had to adapt new ways to be innovative. He sees that the IT landscape has to change, and CIOs must now strive to rapidly adapt to the changing conditions, to compose future business and be innovative in this brave new world. So we certainly have got a challenge ahead of us. And even at WSO2, this has affected us, because it made us think, really, how are we going to respond to Gartner's theories or Gartner's views here? And at WSO2, we believe to be truly innovative, a company really needs to become a software company, really a culture that allows employees to learn to build new digital products in the new digital era moving forward. So if we can say that, then I suppose what follows from that is that really every employee within an organization needs to become a software developer. And therefore, they might need the right digital tools and the right platforms to be that software developer. Now, I mean inexpensive, simple, and easy to use tools that you don't need an engineering degree to leverage. And all employees can use these platforms to create an exciting culture of innovation. So I think we're going to see that in the future more and more. And certainly WSO2 ourselves are developing technologies and platforms to provide that ease of use, innovation experience to organizations. At WSO2, we feel companies need readily available platforms for cloud native digital innovation. And I mean readily available. These platforms that allow them to be more productive, quickly, obviously, and effectively, and achieve business agility at speed. So I hope this WSO2 Summit will give you those insights from our experts, of course, and our customers, and of course, our guest speakers that we have today. One of those guest speakers, and to kick off proceedings, I'm very pleased to welcome Anders Salman Nielsen. He's a futurist and the founder of think tank and trend analyst firm think. He's an awarded keynote speaker, and he helps leaders decode trends, decipher what's next, and turn provocative questions into proactive answers. How cool is that? He has also published 3 books on digital transformation and innovation, and his futurist thinking has been shared by the Wall Street Journal, Financial Review, the BBC, dare I say Esquire, and even ABC TV. But I believe now his biggest accolade of all would be joining us here at the WSO2 2021 APAC Summit. So welcome, Anders, to you. Over to you, and let's stop sharing my screen, and hopefully you can take over the presentation.
G'day. Can you all hear me okay? This slightly weird Swedish Australian accent. Just give me a quick heads up, Tash.
We can hear you.
Fantastic. G'day. Great to be with you. Hopefully this slightly weird Swedish Australian accent, as I mentioned, is making some kind of sense and getting picked up by some of the more analog as well as some of the more digital radio antenna out there in the ether. Tass, thank you so much for opening up the summit. Super exciting times. I am a firm believer, just as you point out, that really fundamentally we're all technology companies today with a license in our old industries. And having done a lot of work with the likes of Gartner, I'm also really heartened by the fact that, Tass, you've just made me a software engineer and a software developer as well without having to take that university degree. So thank you very much. We're going to go through this presentation at a fairly fast and rapid clip around the Asia Pacific region, courtesy of WSO2. The slides are all available for you to download. So if you have a really analog soul, if you go to bit.ly/WSO2 Futurist, just pay attention to the capital letters there. You can even download them and print them to your heart's content, but do make sure that you also carbon offset that decision. If you just want to follow along here in HD in real time or in 4K, feel free to do that IRL as well. Ladies and gentlemen, as a futurist, I'm also a little bit of a traditionalist and, dare I say it, maybe even a little bit of a humanist at heart. And before we talk about 3 major future innovation trends that are all massively impactful for your businesses and your careers moving forward, before we talk about the future, I want to explore with you why on earth a futurist would also be a little bit of a traditionalist and a humanist at heart. So before we talk about the future, let me take you back to my native city of Stockholm, Sweden, to a time 100 years ago, just before the Spanish flu hit major capital cities and the regional environments of the world nearly 100 years ago, to a time that was just a little bit slower. Things were a little bit, in some ways, more black or white, not as grayscale as they seemingly are today. And in fact, amazingly, back then in Stockholm, Sweden, people only wore black or white clothing. Certainly no colourful pocket squares have been invented quite yet. And this here was the urban vista that once upon a time greeted a man by the name of Georg Johansson, or the son of Johan, which sounds very Viking-esque, as we'd call him here in Australia, George Johansson. As the second oldest son on the family farm, he had few inheritance rights, so he had to make his own entrepreneurial, innovative future in the cityscape of Stockholm. And his commercial opportunity, after completing a retail apprenticeship for nearly 6 years, was to take his venture capital, his life savings, and breathe life into his first entrepreneurial venture, a little quaint menswear store in Stockholm, Sweden, to address the increasingly sophisticated Swedish gentlemen of the era. And this was an era before YouTube, before Instagram husbands, even before selfie sticks, when looking into a camera was still very much of a technological novelty, pre-Zoom calls. And his business model was all about the analog and the face-to-face. And in a cap nod of approval to his family heritage on the family farm, he decided to shift his surname from Johansson to the man from the southern farm, or in Swedish, Georg Salman. He's my great-grandfather, and as you can tell, he must have been a bit of a futurist because he's got a great haircut, a cool little pocket square. You can also see that we share some genealogical traits with North Korean dictators. And he invested in the latest technology of that era, the neon sign, to win the then analog hearts and the then analog minds of yesteryear's customers. But for my mother, Birgitta, who I think looks pretty amazing for a 106-year-old. As you can tell, we moisturize in our family, and my mum still dresses me every day of the week. For her, the business environment, even pre-pandemic, changed courtesy of an era of digital disruption, which was that future signal that it was time to change. Digital disruption, in many ways, was the precursor or the dress rehearsal for what we were to see during the pandemic. Yesterday, our customers changed. In fact, yesterday, my mum's customers started scanning barcodes in her store. And even after having a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, with her laying the whole supply chain, the value chain of family businesses around the world that she sources her goods from, laying that bare and telling them about those family businesses, the customer would say, hey, we'll think about it. And they're not going to think about it. They would then exit the store to the sound of a very, very lonely little bell and then order the item on mrporter.com/fashion instead. Of course, brutalizing the sustainability prospects of my mum's business. And my mum doesn't like change, which I think is kind of humane. Of course, the problem with change, any change, including climate change, is that it doesn't really care whether I like it, whether you like it, or whether my mum likes it or not. It's always going to happen without our permission. And the reality is that the way my mum ran the business in a very anti-innovation fashion, in many ways, was perfectly prepared for a world that no longer exists. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a little love letter to my mum on how she could innovate without throwing away the analog baby with the digital bathwater. A little love letter called Digilog, how to win the digital minds and the analog hearts of tomorrow's conscious customers. This has the ears of Fortune 500 CEOs. Australia's second largest bank, its oldest bank, Westpac, credits the ideas in this book, with Westpac moving from number 4 in terms of retail banking customer satisfaction to number 1. Unfortunately for me, the person I wrote this little love letter for has not yet read it. So you can probably sense some anti-innovation or even intergenerational conflict, and you probably just feel like you might be part of a family therapy session so far here out in the ether. Sadly, as the pandemic hit in April of last year, in a failure to innovate, my mum and my dad, after 104 years of family business operation, Sweden's oldest menswear store, family owned, had to file for bankruptcy. Now, my mum always points the finger towards the pandemic, but I would argue that it was her failure to innovate and set up a platform for innovation which truly jeopardized the 104 years of history. Now, this is my biggest failure. This is our family's Kodak moment. And unfortunately, I just wasn't able to sell the importance and the impetus of transformation and change on my mum. I should just say that she was my toughest pro bono client. And my purpose really as a futurist is to help people, help IT professionals, entrepreneurs, innovators, and CEOs around the planet transform in a sustainable fashion. And that's why we're here today. Because the academic research shows us that when it comes to recessions and tough economic periods, it's the innovators who outperform their peers. Innovators who innovate during the economic recession outperform their peers by 10%. And historically, they've outperformed in the economic recovery their competition by 30%. The time for innovation is now, ladies and gentlemen. And as a futurist, I don't just focus on the next shiny new penny of innovation. I ask myself the fundamentally humane questions, like which technologies enable us to be more human or humane? What allows us to trust more as humans, to connect more deeply, to reduce harm and friction, and do less menial work? What emerging innovations facilitate more meaningful, humanitarian, but also planetarian conversations? Because it's those technologies that truly shape the future. Which leads us to our first trend here today, which is that every business model today is getting digitally hacked, for better and for worse. And the important aspect to this is that increasingly in that world, we can start coding for humanity. Now, apologies if anyone has loved ones, family, or friends impacted by these two particular events I'm about to address. I do apologize for raising these examples in the room here today, but I also think the second one is a really heartening example of how the future, when we code for humanity, might in fact be a more humanitarian place than we've ever experienced. The truck on your left, ladies and gentlemen, was the same make and model that on Bastille Day in 2016 in Nice in France was hijacked by a terrorist. He then drove that truck down the esplanade for 1.6 kilometers, in the process taking 92 human lives, 482 people injured in that event, many more families suffering the tragic loss of loved ones, and of course, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The truck on your right was built after an EU, European Union directive, which stated that every truck on the roads of the EU built after 2012 had to be part of the Internet of Things, had to be equipped with sensors, and had to be equipped with an advanced braking system. Now, maybe luckily, or maybe foolishly by the terrorist in the Berlin Christmas market attack of the same year, he decided to hijack the smart truck on your right. And not after 1.6 kilometers, but with his foot still on the accelerator, after only 70 meters in that attack, the truck shut down the terrorist. The loss of human life, less than 10% of what we'd seen in Nice only a few months before. Now, if you're a real cynic, you could also say, well, in the future, ISIS don't need to send in the humans, they'll just send in the code, which is, of course, why cybersecurity is such an important aspect here as well. But no matter what we design, ladies and gentlemen, be it physical hardware or software, we have to code for humanity. And in fact, technology is now enabling us to be more humane and to focus even more on meaningful innovations. In fact, technology is enabling us to take the robot out of the human, to do less of the menial and the mundane and do more of the meaningful and the humane. Let me give you an example of this. Many of you at some stage in your life would have had to file an insurance claim of some description. Now, that used to be a very analog physical process. You probably had to get the president to do a seal and a signature. You sent it off with a pigeon, and hopefully, maybe now, several years later, you might have actually been paid. Let's imagine this for a moment. Lemonade and InsurTech out of the United States thought differently about this. They thought, why don't you just speak the claim into your digital device instead, and through biometric authentication, you're authenticated. Then they run 21 different AI algorithms across the claim. They've now set a record between the claim and the payment. Now, I would argue that in many ways, when we code for more humane experiences, people-centric, as Gartner and Tass point out, what we're in fact doing is that we're removing friction, creating seamless experiences that are not just data-centric, they are also human-centric. Now, in this particular example, I do apologize that it takes an entirety of 6 seconds before you got paid. Imagine what you could have done with the additional 3 seconds in your life, investing them into important innovations, right? I would argue that in many instances, in fact, the most human touch is now, particularly in a pandemic, the digital, contactless touch on anybody's customer journey. In fact, digitized is now humanized. Another example of how technology is now shifting the game when it comes to your organization's brands and their perception in the hearts and minds of tomorrow's conscious consumers is the idea that the IoT, or the Internet of Things, is impacting everything. Now, branding 1.0 used to be all about brands screaming what they stood for, and hopefully somebody listened. Branding 2.0 was through social media, when brands increasingly got hijacked by consumers who also had a thing or two to say about those brands. But now, in an era of the IoT, it's a trialogue, not a monologue or a dialogue, but a trialogue between the brand, the consumer, and the object. Let me give you an example. One of the biggest challenges towards EV, or electronic vehicle adoption, around the world has been our sense of range anxiety. In other words, where's the next Tesla supercharger station, right? Now, we have this every day, right? Just bring this to mind. Do you ever run around with range anxiety thinking about how your Samsung or your iPhone battery is currently performing? If it's running on yellow, again, apologies for releasing these pre-traumatic experiences for all of you. But imagine being a Tesla owner a few hurricane seasons ago in Florida, and you're fleeing with your family and your most beloved belonging in your Tesla down the highway, and a Hurricane Irma, is chasing you down that highway. And all of a sudden, your Tesla battery starts running on low. Do you think you're giving yourself a clap on the shoulder for being an early adopter of new technology? What kind of glances do you think you're getting from your loved ones, from the passenger seat? And as you see the petroleum-based vehicles overtake you, all of a sudden you're wondering, why on earth did I make that transformative shift? Until all of a sudden, a little message from Elon Musk comes across the dashboard and goes, "Fret not, human. We've just remotely upgraded the battery so you can safely get out of harm's way via the cloud." True story. What do you think your relationship to that previously cold piece of technology has now just become? It's become anthropomorphized and humanized because somebody coded for humanity. Somebody coded for predictive customer experience. Now, APIs, of course, are a critical part of this journey, whether it's in a digital customer experience or something more physical. Rappi is a platform across Latin America and Central America, which is kind of like an Uber on steroids. They'll deliver anything. In fact, they'll even develop, easy to say if you're Swedish, they'll even deliver a fourth player for PS4 to your home if you're short one man or woman, for example. They'll deliver anything and solve a last mile problems. Now, in the click to Rappi solution, anybody that has an inventory system that's integrated with Rappi, you don't even need the Rappi app on your phone. You just go click to Rappi. And in real time, of course, the solution knows whether the thing that you just ordered, maybe another PS4 player, is currently in store. This, of course, is the power of open innovation and APIs, both in the world of software, but also, of course, in the world of hardware. The question in our organizations is whether we're open to these new ideas. In fact, some research was done at the University of California at Berkeley when they posed the question, culturally in your organization, if you believe that you would have to do different work as a result of a new automation or innovation idea being implemented, would you offer up such an idea? Only 37% of people would. But then they asked a slightly different question. If you believed the new automation or innovation idea that you're about to proffer up would lead to you doing better work, would you offer up such an idea? 87% all of a sudden said yes. In your organization, are you part of the 37 or the 87%? Do we think about automation and innovation as something that enables even better work or something that feels a bit different? Now, the science fiction author Douglas Adams has something to say about this when he says, when it comes to our reactions towards new technologies, he's come up with a set of rules. Anything that's in the world when you're born is natural and normal and ordinary. It's just a natural part of the way the world works. Anything invented between the ages of 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. Anything invented after the age of 35 is against the natural order of things. And I think this is the way my mum has felt about change and disruption. Now, you know, in my family that we've lost both lives and livelihoods. The pandemic has shown a light both on underlying health conditions, but also of underlying health conditions of businesses. Now, so many families around the world have lost both lives and livelihoods. In my instance, as a bit of an optimist, I would still say I choose this pandemic over some historical ones. Let's compare and contrast for a moment in time this pandemic and our response to it back to the time of the Black Plague, when in a very anti-data scientific move, the Pope at the time decided that he believed that cats were the vectors of the devil. And in an anti-scientific move, he decided to kill off all cats. Now, cats were, incidentally, the natural enemy of rats, which did carry the bacterium at the time, a bacterium that led to Florence, the later epicenter of the first Renaissance, losing half of its population. Today, we have technology. We have modern science. We have data science at our disposal, which enables us to scale our humanity in a way that's truly data-centric, but is also people and human-centric. Through telemedicine, we're able to democratize access to the latest thinking. And hopefully, if our governments get their act together, hopefully we can ensure that everybody in the world gets access to the vaccine, for example, and better cures. So this gives me hope for the future. It gives me hope that this recession, this economic slowdown is going to be a baptism of fire. During the Great Recession in America, new business models like Uber and Airbnb arose out of the ashes. During the SARS epidemic in China, business models like JD.com, Alibaba, and Taobao rose out of the ashes as people could no longer go and physically shop. And I believe this time right now is a new era of innovation, one where the conscious consumer is now taking matters into their own hands, and they want to team up with brands who help them think smart, long-term, responsibly and sustainably. And this is important because when we don't have data in front of us, real-time data, as careerists, as professionals, or as consumers, we make bad decisions. Let me give you an example. Back in 2012, the Australian Productivity Commission and the Australian Productivity Commission and the Australian Bureau of Statistics teamed up to do some research in the context of disposable incomes. They asked themselves the question, when an Australian say they spend $100, of course, this research is only for Australia, what did you actually spend audited? Now, some of you might want to send along your loved ones to this particular piece of research. When we spend $100 at the IKEA, the world's largest contributor to the high international divorce rate, the real audited amount was $132. When we said, hey, honey, watch the cricket at the pub last night, spend $100, the real audited amount was $158. And never ever have your conferences in the future near a casino, ladies and gentlemen, because when Australians say spend $100 at the casino last night, the real audited amount was $735. Clearly, when we listen to our gut feel in the context of ones and zeros and data, as humans, we suck. Now, let's compare and contrast that to the increasingly digitized professional, the digitized consumer. Now, a few too many years ago, I ran the New York Marathon, and I did so spontaneously with 16 hours preparation. Don't try this at home, ladies and gentlemen. With 2 beers in Brooklyn ahead of the race, I always sort of knew to do my carb loading. I always sort of knew that the last 39.5 kilometers were going to suck, but at least to my aid, I had a little piece of digital software and digital hardware, the iPhone, coupled up with Nike Plus, enabling me to, in real time, see how I was traveling around the world virtually, a new augmented layer on the physical reality I was running through. I could tell the couple of times I slowed down to just hide from the world in the bathrooms, or when I sped up to go through more dangerous neighborhoods. Through heat mapping technology, through topographical maps, if I ever did want to run the race ever again, I could actually prepare for this race and figure out how to overtake my competition, courtesy of this digital layer on reality. And now, for every step I make, for every breath I take, I know Nike is watching me so that I can overtake my competition sooner than at the halfway mark. They know for somebody like me who used to run in ASIS, once I log into the software, because of its beautiful user interface 5 times, I'm more likely to buy which kind of product, courtesy of the software. They sell more of the hardware. The only way to truly be human-centric today is to be data-centric, and data centricity can also lead to us innovating. Let me give you an example of this. Now, there's probably a few legal users of Netflix out there in the ether today. Now, Netflix used to distribute other brands' products with a pigeon physically via a DVD distribution center. They got very little data back when people returned those DVDs, but then they shifted to a digital distribution model so they could all digitally eavesdrop on all of us. And they knew a large portion of their database pre-controversy loved Kevin Spacey, loved David Fincher as a director. And if you overlay over the top of those two concentric circles a success script from the UK from 20 years earlier, you know that you have the makings of a hit series later to become House of Cards. Wouldn't it be amazing to know that your next innovation efforts would be a success even before you invest in them? They even then A/B split tested every Pantone color to go into the creative poster that they launched to win hearts as well as minds. When we see bad design that's not human-centric in the physical world, this is very evident to all of us, right? This is what I call the stairway to hell. It is not the best version or best design of how to get away from a fire in a tall building. But when it comes to software or the user experience, this is not always something that's evident to us. But I love this word from David Kelly, one of the founders of IDEO, who says, if you want to improve a piece of software, all you have to do is watch people using it and see when they grimace. And then you can fix that. Our role today is to remove friction and design seamlessness into our customer and, of course, our humans that we work with, their experiences of work. The other thing that augments us today is not just data that makes us smarter, it's also, of course, other humans. And the research from BCG shows that the more diverse as well as inclusive our organizations are of different styles of thinkers, the more revenue those companies have created from new products and services invented in the last 3 years than their homogeneous competition. This is amazing, right? And the more women they have in their teams and as senior managers, the more disruptive the innovations those companies are responsible for. Really what this comes down to is combining the best of left brain, STEM-based sciences, technology, engineering, and maths thinking with creative, emotionally intelligent, innovative, entrepreneurial thinking. We have to make sure that the left brain and the right brain is truly represented in our organizations. Like at one of our organizations that we work with, this is in fact is my son's favorite client of mine, Lego. Lego is all about open API style innovation. In fact, they say that 99.9% of the smartest people in the world don't work for Lego. This is pretty modest, but of course they're one of the most innovative companies in the world, and they're happy to be heretical in their innovations. In fact, and Google this carefully, by the way, toys for adults, ladies and gentlemen, I had to look second time here. They found out that they're no longer just a company that sells to kids. In fact, one of their fastest growing markets is for kidults, because they realize that the data and the innovators, external and internal, realize that they're now kidults, adults who buy kids' toys or toys for adults. Are you able to innovate in a way that's truly heretical? Finally, transformation sits at the core of any innovation efforts, and brands have to embed social and environmental mission into the fabric of our futures. Nike understands that they're part of the transformation economy. We're not just expecting a great experience when we run or we buy Nike equipment. Used to be Asus, now it's Nike. They realize that they're not just part of the experience economy, but increasingly about the transformation economy. They partner up with their consumers to help transform us to live our best lives. And for us to truly create trust with our consumers of tomorrow, we have to ensure that they buy into the technology, the solutions, and the products that we build. What's the definition of trust? The best definition of trust I've heard is from my friend Rachel Botsman at the University of Oxford Said School of Business, who says that trust is a confident relationship with the unknown. How do we get there? Largely, we get there through innovation and story. Trying something new like a digital currency or an autonomous vehicle requires somebody to tell us a science fiction story of why we should suspend disbelief and go along for the ride. And today, because of technology, we can tap into, as we have to do less of the menial and the mundane, into what the Japanese in Okinawa call ikigai, or life's purpose, a raison d'etre, a reason for being, where we can tap into what we're good at, what we love doing, what makes us money, yes, importantly, but also what's good for the world and good for humans around us. Like our friends at Vitana from MetLife in Singapore. They created a solution courtesy of technology and an open API for a select number of people, from the Singaporean e-health records and government through the GP practices, MetLife, and the and Ethereum, the blockchain, right? Together, these enable a new type of innovative product for Singaporean women who are pregnant and might suffer from gestational diabetes. 20% of Singaporean women who are pregnant eventually suffer from that. When they have their pregnancy certified and of course warranted by a GP, they're offered this insurance. And if they do take it out, and if they later suffer from gestational diabetes, they don't even need to file a claim. It all just happens seamlessly in the background because some innovators in the background decided to collaborate in a spirit of open innovation. Today, we have to make sure that our innovations are sustainable and are aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There has to be an eco in our economic recovery. And I want to give you a couple of examples of how brands are using the creativity within constraints that the UN SDGs are offering us today. For example, number 12, responsible production and consumption, and 14, life underwater. If you think about this ad about the hardwares on your right, an old Radio Shack ad from 1991, every piece of hardware that was using planetary virgin resources in that ad are now found on your iPhone or your smart device. We had to buy all of these crazy pieces of technology that we would stick in our kit bag to perform as well or worse than our iPhone is today. And the iPhone is largely, goal number 12, part of the circular economy. Using recycled bits today, we can just trade in our old iPhone to buy a new one. In fact, Apple is today one of the largest gold miners in the world because we bring our gold in our iPhones back to them. We are now, courtesy of technology, getting more productive while treading more lightly on the planet. Another example of both the circular economy, but also life underwater and creativity and innovation within constraints, is the Australian brand ZeroCo, that's removing plastics from the ocean and turning them into refillable pockets. These are really refillable small pockets. They send out plant-based cleaning products that, of course, are eco and environmentally friendly to our homes, similar to the milkman, what the milkman used to do. Then we have our forever bottles, which again, they've saved from the oceans, that we refill with. And as we use those plant-based products, of course, we can send back the refillable pockets to the producer and manufacturer, or carbon offset or carbon neutral. The UN's Sustainable Development Goals ensure that the innovations we drive are fit for the future, but also that we use them as creativity within constraints. Now, futurists don't leave you with 3 silver bullet points to fix all your challenges, ladies and gentlemen, but we do like to ask questions to get our innovation wheels into motion. And my 5 questions for all of you are the following. How can you get 2x, 2 times the result with half the effort through technology, but also your human creativity? Which old analog processes don't offer you any immediately actionable data insights and need upgrading immediately? What would be the result or the compound effect of your competition adopting the right exponential technologies while you simply don't by the year 2025? What's the analog baby in your business that mustn't be thrown away with the digital bathwater, but which can be further enhanced and amplified courtesy of technology? And finally, what would your competition not want you to do next? I am a firm believer that we are now at the dawn of a second renaissance. Just like the Black Plague laid the foundations for the first Renaissance, a flourishing of human innovation and creativity, today we are now seeing a remnant of that social mobility. A time back then where, because of the tragic consequences, peasants became artisans, artisans became merchants, and merchants became new noblemen and women. Today, when you combine the best of human and technology, tradition and the virtual, when we use the best of artificial intelligence and human intelligence together, we can truly drive innovation forward. When we combine the best of STEM-based thinking with the best of right-brain thinking, that is when our organizations create innovations that are truly fit for the future. Start preparing for that future today, because it is where you and your children will spend the rest of your lives. Thank you very much, and see you in that future.
All right, excellent. That was amazing, Anders. Thank you very much. And always wanted to visit Sweden, and you actually took me back there, the land of the great Zlatan Ibrahimovic. You took me back 100 years and brought me back as well. Thank you very much for that. All right. Next up, we've got our CTO, Eric Newcomer. He's going to talk to us about improving customer experience through cloud-native deployments. Eric, over to you.
Hey, Prahlad, thanks very much. And
no worries.
add my
Stage is yours.
thanks to Anders for a great presentation as well. I'm getting a bit of an echo here. Excuse me. See if I can fix it. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, good. Wow, that was really great. Anders, by the way, that's my brother's name, if you can still hear me. All of the children in my family have Swedish names, Swedish ancestors. Great to see those pictures of old Stockholm there. So I want to talk now about something a bit different, but we're very much related to what Anders was talking about, which is how do we, accelerate some of this great innovation that we all want to become a part of and facilitate. Just trying to see now here how there it is. Sorry about that. Just want to make sure I can share the slides out here. So what I wanted to talk about today was how we can improve this customer experience that Anders was talking about at speed. I think it's very important when we talk about innovation to recognize that innovation is how you solve the customer's problem. And to understand the customer's problem, you want to get your application out there, you want to get your digital experience out there, and you want to find those grimaces that Anders mentioned so you can see where the problem is and how to fix it. And to do that, you need to deploy things rapidly, agilely, and at speed. And this is why we want to go to the cloud. And that's what I want to talk about now, is how cloud native computing can help with this process, help facilitate that cycle of innovation, of understanding the customer experience at the speed they expect it to be given and fixed. So just first, a quick introduction to myself. I joined WSO2 last November, coming up on a year now. I was at Citibank before that. My most recent position there was Chief Security Architect at the Consumer Bank. Before that, I spent several years as Chief Architect, Treasury and Trade Solutions, or the Institutional Bank, where security was part of my remit, and thus sort of the connection. I spent quite a bit of time there working on cloud transition, cloud migration, and cloud security. So I'm very happy to join WSO2 at a great time when we're making the move ourselves to the cloud and help out with that cloud product strategy, which is a big part of my job here now. Before all of that, I was CTO at Iona Technologies, very similar position to what I have today. So it's a bit of a back to the future for me. And back in those days, I was working on web services standards, and I was working with Sanjeeva and Paul, the founders of WSO2 at the time. And I remember very well when they told me they were going off to start a company, and wondering if they were a bit crazy. But look at this, 16 years later, and what a great company it is. And I'm very glad to be joining at this time, particularly when we have the chance for the next stage of significant growth. based on the new products. So what I wanted to talk about is this question of cloud native deployment and how does that fit into the innovation cycle that Anders so clearly explained in his great talk about how we can think about the future and how we're going to get there. And I was particularly struck about the humane aspect of it. And I'll try to get back to that a little bit later. But first of all, I want to put this discussion in the context of computing evolution. So a bit like Anders, I'm starting a bit back in history and then going to talk about the future. On the left-hand side here, we see how computing was done 50, 60 years ago. This is UNIVAC, which was one of the first computers to run a business application. To run it, you went into the room, you used the computer from that room, as you can see the people here are doing, and it ran. And in those days, it wasn't even interactive. It was just batch. You fed the program in, you ran it, you got the results, and that was it until the next time you ran a program. Today, on the right-hand side, this is what a modern data center looks like for a cloud provider. You cannot even get into this room if you would want to. You can't even get into the grounds of these data centers without security authorization. They are very locked down. So it's a very different model. People are not interacting directly with these computers. And what you're seeing is rows and rows of consumer-grade PC servers that fulfill now the function of the old mainframes used to function, but in a slightly different way, and with some different characteristics that are very important to innovation and supporting the scale and speed of innovation that we need to support to get the customer experiences to the level that we need them on those digital projects. One other thing to say about this, the older systems, we had to design applications for them to get the best out of them. And for the new model, we have to design for that as well to get the best out of it. That's a little bit of what we're going to talk about later. The old days, of course, computers were in a room. Computers had names. You knew where they were. You knew where your computer room was. You knew what the server names were. Even today, the traditional computer room has those characteristics. And the modern computer room, you don't even have any idea what the names are of any of these computers. Somebody knows, but you don't. You don't know where your program is running, and you shouldn't have to care about that. This is some of the characteristics that actually will help you once you understand how to leverage them. So a little bit of a summary on this compare and contrast. As I said, at one time, you went to the computer. Now the computers are everywhere. We have computers in our hands. Anders pointed that out as well, how the great computer, the iPhone by itself is, a mobile phone. You have a computer everywhere. It's not in a place. It's just there. Computing is called cloud computing. It's just in the cloud. It's just somewhere. It's everywhere. And cloud programs running everywhere deliver the scale, resiliency, and agility that are expected for digitization. And Anders in his presentation listed some of the top digital companies, Airbnb and Amazon and Netflix, that provide the great digital experience and are the epitome of it. They're held up as the gold standard for how you do this. And they all are running in the cloud. They all are running in those modern data centers. And that's what gives that kind of scale, resiliency, agility, and always-on characteristic that everyone has come to expect from a digital application. So that's what we need to do as well to keep up with those guys and provide our competitive differentiation, our innovation in a way in which fulfills those expectations of the customers and gives them that great experience that they're looking for and that they'll get somewhere else if they don't get it from you. Now, how did we get here? I just want to give a brief summary of some of what has been going on to bring us to this point that we're going to talk about as to how this works and how it can be used to your advantage and to support the innovation. So cloud native deployment is something that is used to deploy applications, as I said, designed for these modern data centers. And doing that is the reason why, creating that design is the reason why microservices exist and why app functions are broken up into microservices with strict interface control so they can be deployed independently and evolved independently. If you look at the Amazon website, the one-click button is a microservice that can be deployed anytime the team who's building it wants to deploy it and has a fix to make. as long as they don't break the interface with all the other functions and capabilities on that web page. So this is what you want to achieve, to be able to have that same kind of agility to push change. And Amazon's website pushes changes hundreds of times a day into production. When I was working at Citi, we struggled to do that once a month for some applications. So this is the kind of a step change that technology, the new technology, is supporting, a paradigm shift really between the old mainframe-based style and the new scale-out style of modern computing on hundreds of thousands of computers, in which you need to break up your functions into microservices, control the interfaces, and deploy them out there using Docker containers, which recently have been standardized. Not that recently, maybe 5-6 years ago. But after microservices kind of were discovered, if you will, as the best way to do this, Docker containers came along to help run that microservice on any computer, so it didn't matter where it was running, didn't matter which computer it was running on in that vast array of computers. And then finally, the last sort of step in the evolution of this was the standardization of Kubernetes, which we've seen in the more recent past, which orchestrates those containers across the computers. And everything now, which has to be automated, as I said, you can't get in the room, you can't interact with the computers directly. Everything has to be automated for this to work. And let's talk about what that automation is and how to think about it and how to work with it to support our innovations and our customer experience digital projects. Okay, so this is the analogy that the automation is based on. It's containers, based on shipping container idea. You can have a shipping container of a standard size. It goes on a ship, it goes on a train, goes on a truck, and it revolutionized shipping. And shipping is much more efficient, except perhaps because of the pandemic. It has a few bumps along the way now, but it's revolutionized how goods are shipped across the globe. And in this picture, the crane, the container analogy is Docker, and the crane is Kubernetes, which is taking the containers and putting them where they need to go. Kubernetes is what deploys those containers into those data centers that we looked at in the picture a couple of slides ago. Just as an interesting side note, you can actually get a data center in a container. Sun is kind of an older picture. Sun doesn't really exist anymore, but when they did, they sold racks of those little PC-grade computer servers in a container. IBM still sells them, so you can get a container to run your containers in, just as a kind of a funny side note. All right, so back to how this works and how to think about it and how it can help you. Kubernetes is standardizing the container orchestration. So basically the way it works, the development team responsible for creating a microservice develops the functionality, develops the API for that functionality, hands it off to the team that runs the Kubernetes cluster using a Kubernetes config file, which tells the Kubernetes control plane where to put the containers, how many containers to run. It doesn't really tell them where, it just says how many containers to put in how many pods. And Kubernetes kind of figures out in the data center where these things are going to go based on what's available, what's free, and what slots are there the containers can be put in. Kubernetes also provides some runtime services around making sure the containers are available, does some load balancing for scheduling, does some API discovery to access the APIs, and provides the container runtime in the workload node. So you've got containers running in Kubernetes pods and Kubernetes control planes, taking care of all of that provisioning and making sure they have the qualities of service you need, and automatically expanding the resources if you run out of resources. So everything is going great, right? So everything is wonderful. What could go wrong? Well, the problem is if something does go wrong, it's not very easy to fix. You have this flow chart from the Kubernetes website that shows you all of the steps needed to debug a Kubernetes cluster if something goes wrong. So I think a lot of people in the industry are familiar with this, that Kubernetes complexity is hard to deal with. And a lot of companies that are digital leaders will have specific teams called site reliable engineering teams that take care of putting these Kubernetes clusters in place, running them, maintaining, operating them, making sure that they are available and are up and ready for the containers to be delivered into them and deployed into them for the microservices-based applications to run and provide all that great agility and resiliency and scale of those benefits that you get from the cloud native infrastructure that everybody really expects in their digital applications. So this is a complexity and a kind of a difficulty. And Kubernetes is not quite so simple to set up or to bug and maintain if something goes wrong. So luckily, though, I think at this point, we're at a point of the evolution of the industry around the cloud native infrastructure. It's been there about 20 years now. Google invented it about 20 years ago, and it's been very, very widely adopted for all the reasons of the benefits that we've been talking about that it gives to the digital applications. But we can tell that Kubernetes has become the standard because everyone is offering it. We can assume that some kind of flavor of Kubernetes is going to be wherever we want to deploy our cloud native applications. We can see AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, Oracle Cloud, DigitalOcean, Linode. There's plenty of on-prem solutions for Kubernetes, Rancher, OpenShift, Nomad. So some flavor of Kubernetes is always going to be there, whether you're running a private cloud, running in the public cloud, and we can start to say, okay, let's assume we can build a platform on top of this. We know it's always going to be there, and we can abstract away that complexity and start offering those capabilities that you need on top of Kubernetes, that you need for your applications, such as handling multi-node and multi-cluster environments, hybrid environments, where some pieces are running on-prem, some pieces are running in the cloud, handling the secrets, config management, identity access management, specific CI/CD for Kubernetes, for Docker containers to be put in Kubernetes. How do you do storage, monitoring, logging, API access, one-click Helm deployment catalogs? All of these things now can be built on a platform on top of Kubernetes and help abstract these difficulties with deployment and help support what you want to accomplish without having to deal with that difficult complexity of Kubernetes cluster setup and config and management. So our thought is, how about a Kubernetes platform for APIs? This is our new product called Choreo, and our thought here is to abstract the deployment aspect of cloud native computing so that it's very easy to deal with, and you can spend your time on, I think it was what Anders said about more humane types of creativity and less time on fiddling around with the technology and worrying about the details of how everything gets deployed into the cloud, so you can get the benefits of the cloud for your innovation, for your creativity, for your customer experience. This is a vision of Choreo. It's out in beta. Please try it. Let us know what you think. What I want to talk briefly about on this picture is that, first of all, we're abstracting the development piece of this cloud native computing, and I haven't talked much about that today because I've been focusing on the deployment piece, which is, I think, sometimes more challenging and can be more valuable for a solution if you get something that's very easy to work with. But we do have a developer abstraction as well. I think Taz talked about this very early in his initial talk about how everyone has to participate in the development of digital products, because all companies are becoming software and technology companies, and Anders reinforced this as well. And in that context, we need to have these kinds of abstractions for developers. Citizen developers have a no-code abstraction for them, ad hoc developers, a low-code abstraction for them, and enterprise developers or pro developers need to access the code. And we need to have abstractions for all of these levels of skill to allow everyone to participate and everyone to join in the development of these new types of applications, the services, the integrations, and the APIs, and then feed it in to the ops area to automatically kick off the build, test, deploy, and run pipeline, publish the API, consume the APIs from an API marketplace representing existing services, SaaS APIs that are brought into the environment that help create the new digital experiences from combining APIs with new services. And so our thought is, let's abstract the development piece of the challenge here, with some low code and no code abstractions for developers, become more productive there, and abstract the operations aspect, the deployment aspect, so that once something has been developed, there's really one button you click and everything just gets deployed out to production. This one gives a bit of a more characteristic of the platform features: low-code integration, microservices, service mesh if needed. Inputs to this are, this, of course, solution architecture, domain-driven design to figure out the granularity of the microservices, the API first design, the relationship of the microservices. All of this really has to be done, and we can help with that as well with our consulting services. But there's many ways to do this, to create those designs before approaching the platform, to start the development through these abstractions, create these low-code integrations and microservices, deploy the code out to GitHub, trigger DevOps pipelines, and trigger a GitOps configuration mechanism to define the handoff into Kubernetes. So we've got the code coming into DevOps, putting it to Docker containers, automatically generating the Kubernetes config files for the handoff to Kubernetes, deploying it out, publishing the API for those integrations and microservices into the marketplace, where we can also consume the APIs. For completeness, the platform includes observability to see that the code is running correctly, security and compliance for zero trust deployments into the zero trust network, AI and machine learning to help you code this correctly in the first place, giving coding suggestions for data mappings, protocol selections, connector selections. Observability also helps with latency and performance characteristics of the platform. So just to wrap up and summarize the evolution of API platforms, based on the maturity of Kubernetes, we know from the evolution of this cloud computing paradigm through microservices, Docker containers, and Kubernetes standards, that we can assume Kubernetes is there and start to build platforms on top of it to abstract and help eliminate a lot of the complexity and improve the productivity and help developers spend more time developing and eliminate a whole class of issues around funding and setting up SRE teams and CI/CD teams. And you can do that if you want with this tool, but we think there's a lot of benefit to having someone do it for you now that the platform of cloud native computing, now that cloud native computing is sufficiently mature to build this kind of platform on top of it. And okay, everybody says Kubernetes is there until something else comes along, but I remember, 20 years ago, web services came out. Everybody said something else will come along, but we still have, and that's true, something else did, but we still do have a lot of WSDL and SOAP out there. So for now, at least for the foreseeable future, the industry standard is Kubernetes for container orchestration, Docker for containers. Sorry, Heroku, Cloud Foundry, OpenStack, Meso Swarm, all the contenders for this standard now have to kind of go by the wayside, and we can assume Kubernetes is going to be there. Okay, there are challenges with Kubernetes, but these are solved by abstracting the flavor into a platform. And now we know that Kubernetes is going to be there. We can develop and auto-deploy APIs and microservices with confidence into the new environment and focus on our creativity, focus on our innovation, focus on our customer experience. I'd just like to wrap up by talking about one example. I want to be clear, this is not a WSO2 customer, but it is a very well-documented and well-known case study of a company moving from an on-prem environment entirely into the cloud. And this is what they say about their experience in their case studies that they published mostly on the Amazon website, because they did move to AWS. And they say they have achieved, by moving to the cloud, a competitive advantage, a competitive edge, because now they can serve customers at the speed they demand. And this is because they have the agility and speed to market of using microservices, of breaking the problem up and iterating more quickly, pushing change more quickly, finding out what those customer problems are, identifying those grimace points, fixing them, putting them out multiple times a day, not in weeks or months, and help get the competitive edge, because now they're providing that improved customer experience much more quickly and much more effectively than they could have done before when they were running on sort of pre-cloud old. I don't want to say all mainframes because it's not all mainframes, but it's more that kind of approach, which is less agile and doesn't give you the benefits of the new approach that they have achieved. They've also said that they call themselves now a technology company that offers financial services as digital products. So a proof point of that part of the discussion. Deliver innovation more quickly because of AWS features and technologies. Developers are productive very quickly. But here, last but certainly not least, in the information that we get from their experience, that they had to invest in the governance function quite a bit, to security practices to make sure cloud is secure, because there are more challenges in the public cloud for security, and training for cloud literacy. Overall, this took them 4 years. It was a 4-year journey to get from the on-prem environment and the old way of doing things into the cloud environment and the modern way of doing things to achieve these benefits. And we achieve these benefits in a lot less time. It shouldn't take anyone 4 years. Now that we know what the challenges are, now that we know what the technology is, now that we have the Kubernetes standard and we're able to build platforms on it and abstract that complexity, we should be able to reduce this time significantly. And that's our goal with Choreo. All right, thanks very much. That will do it for me. Over to you, Hula.
All right, thank you, Eric. It was great. And I know it's pretty late for you over there, but thank you very much for coming in. And
you're very welcome. Anytime I get a chance to talk to Australians is fine with me.
No worries. Thank you very much, Eric. All right. Okay, guys, we are now going to break into the separate tracks, the business track and the technical track. But before that, just a very quick reminder about the polls for today. We'll be running 2 types of polls. When you go into the technical track, there'll be different polls for each of the technical sessions that you join in. And when you go into the main section, the reception area, there'll be a charity poll. What that means is that for each of you joining us today, we are happy to donate $10 on your behalf to one of the 3 charities that we have selected. You can get details of those 3 charities when you go into the reception area, but generally we'll be covering nature conservancy, community building, and education. So these are very worthy causes. So please feel free to select the charity of your choice. But if you don't, that's fine. If you can't make up your mind, that's still fine. We'll be donating $10 on your behalf to one of the 3 charities that we pick randomly. Okay, great. So guys, you can see the menu bar on your left-hand side. If you go to the stages tab, you can see the 3 stages. So you can actually go into either the business stage or the technical stage. And my colleague Kavishka will meet you guys on the technical track, and I'll see you guys on the business track. Okay, see you there.